What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fantasy Files. I just wanted to record my thoughts on the Hand of the Sun King before I get really immersed in my next read. This video will be spoiler-free, although I will talk in vague terms about the first couple chapters to present a clear idea of the story. So if you're really worried or sensitive to like vague plot spoilers, then maybe click away, but honestly, I think you'll be fine. Also, thank you to everyone who's been listening on Spotify and Google Podcasts. We really appreciate your support. I do want to mention that we are primarily a YouTube channel, so sometimes there might be a little bit of a disconnect, but we appreciate you wherever you choose to watch or listen. If you are watching on YouTube, please remember to comment, like, and subscribe, and check us out on Twitter at Files Fantasy. Okay, without further ado, let's talk about The Hand of the Sun King by JT Greathouse. So I decided to pick up this book after reading so much of my usual European style fantasy, needing a bit of a palate cleanser and just needing to break up my subgenres a bit. This book is definitely more Asian inspired than some of the other books that I typically read. And to be honest, I don't usually get into kind of the Asian fantasy subgenre very much. So this was a very welcome diversion from the norm for me. I really don't know anything about the author other than he lives in the same state that I do, but he is obviously very talented and writes beautiful prose, especially for a debut novel. And I just enjoyed his writing so much. It was so fluid and felt so natural. It was very enjoyable to read. The audiobook narrator, Jeremy Ang Jones, really stole the show for me. He has this smoky, quiet voice that was completely mesmerizing and captivating the entire time, and would make me continue listening late into the night. The book takes place in this country called Nayan that has been invaded by the Siamese Empire. Both societies use magic and hold it in high regard, but are employed in two very different ways that you'll find out as you read. The story completely takes place in the first-person POV of Wen Alder, who has a very conflicted family life. His father is a Siamese merchant and his mother is a native Nayan who has given up her culture to try to fit with Siamese customs and try to fit in a little bit. Wen Alder's grandmother is very anti-Siamese rule and trains Alder in the ways of the Nayan to harness their kind of magic, which he ends up finding is very restrictive, much to his frustration, because Alder, as he is often called, yearns for unrestrained, total control of magic. His grandmother performs a naming ceremony which enables this magic, giving him the name Foolish Cur, which is kind of his Nayan name that comes from the ceremony. And it's not to be spoken around the Siamese because they very much look down on Nayan culture. And I think the vibe that I got was that they assume if you are giving into your Nayan heritage, then you're automatically against the empire. That's just kind of the feeling I got from it. His grandmother isn't very eager to teach him all of the magic, as she feels he is not ready for it and will hurt himself. But really the only thing he cares about is learning more about magic. It's basically the entire motivation leading him throughout most of the book, which I actually really liked because it really turns him into a morally gray character, willing to do anything and to please anybody who will teach him more about magic, giving up things that he might have believed in order to further his goals to that end. In doing so, he follows the path that his father is pushing him towards, which is attaining a high rank in the Sienese society known as the Hand of the Emperor, which is basically an advisor and soldier who works in direct obedience to the emperor and is one of the only positions in the empire allowed to use Sienese magic without being in this position or a couple others. You really have no way to access Sienese magic. Okay, Hank, you gotta get down. Good boy. So to attain this, he has to go through years and years of schooling and pass all these very difficult tests, and has to kind of socialize and network with the right people and really kind of put aside anything he might have once believed in to completely devote himself to the empire in his one pursuit of magic. He's essentially using the ranks of the empire to get closer to his goal. And that is really where the story gets rolling. I don't want to go too far past that because of spoilers, but most of the book we see him try to either appease the empire or appease like the Nyan side of his family to further his own goals. And he kind of struggles with who he is deep down between his Nyan heritage and his Sienese heritage, and also wanting to form a third path for himself, which is really kind of the main plot point of the story, is he is trying to find this third way of getting what he wants. This book is very narrowly focused on Alder, since he is the only point of view that we get. And it's very much about his specific journey and growth as a person and his inner conflict. So we really don't get too deep into side characters. Like, they are there and they help him. They either help or don't help with his journey. But we don't get a whole lot of character arcs from them or character growth from them. There's a couple that are pretty good, but for the most part, it's really you're watching Alder, and it's his character story. So who exactly is the main character? When Alder is someone who is shown magic at a young age and literally becomes addicted to it like a drug. He has a deep desire for power and the understanding of magic, but does not want magic with boundaries. He wants it completely unrestrained with no limits, completely under his control. He could easily become kind of a villain. I feel like that's kind of your typical villain origin story, like this search for power and wanting power unrestrained. And so it's kind of interesting to see how the book makes you care about him, but also dislike him at the same time. He very, very rarely creates a emotional attachment with anybody, as he is pretty much using every single person to get closer to his one goal of learning magic. He's so manipulating and deceitful in his journey to find true magic. It's really hard to root for him most of the time. Plus, for most of the book, he is kind of an arrogant asshole. He's also, like I said, he's also really conflicted. This is the story about a young man who knows that he wants this thing, but doesn't know how to get there, and he hasn't grown into any real adult character traits yet. He's still pretty young, and so he is just doing whatever he has to do to get to this one goal. I don't want to spoil anything, but this does change and develop as we get further into the book. I don't want him to sound like he's one-dimensional, because he's not, but he's just very, very entrenched in this idea of doing anything he has to do to get to magic. And so definitely later in the book, we do see a bit of a character arc. Some people are going to like it, some people won't. I was somewhere in the middle, honestly. I think it wasn't like a full character arc, and I'm sure there's going to be more character growth in books to come. But yeah, it was there's some changes at the end there for sure. So I actually really like this about his character. He's kind of like a grimdark character set in a fantasy world, like a character from the First Law trilogy or something, where everybody's just like super selfish and there's almost no redeeming qualities about any of them. So often we get these characters that are anti-heroes and always have at least one redeeming quality. And Alder may have some redeeming qualities, but they are far outshadowed by his willingness to do anything he needs to do to get closer to magic. And it just makes him feel extremely real, for better or worse. Like, whether you like those kind of characters or not, you really can't argue that this character doesn't feel like a real person with real motivations. Sometimes our motives are not altruistic. Sometimes we don't have some desire to help the world with our talent. And I think those stories are just as worth telling as the typical hero story. He mentions multiple times throughout the book that either one side of the family or the other have always made decisions for him and pushed him towards a certain path. And he yearns to find this third path that is different from both of them. He has his grandmother telling him to hate the Sienese, and his father telling him to make the family proud by becoming a high-ranking official and serving the empire. And the book ends at a point that really makes me wonder who he will now become in the second book. Will it be for better or worse? You'll have to read and find out. There's not much I can say about the magic system without spoiling too much, but it is kind of a softer magic system, although I could see the author going into it in more depth in coming books. This first book was very much laying the groundwork for both the setting and the magic, and we don't really get the opportunity to learn about a lot of the magic besides what Alder sees himself firsthand as he is kind of chasing the next lead, like going from lead to lead to lead to get closer to magic. And there's, I guess there is like a lot of magic in this book, but it's so confined to what Alder knows about it. It's so confined to his perception and what people are willing to teach him that it kind of leaves us in the dark a bit as well. So basically, the ability to use Nyan magic is attained through a blood ceremony and has restrictions and boundaries upon how you can use it as it is given to you by the three Nyan gods. Sienese magic is passed down from the emperor to his servants and is highly restricted on how it can be used. The way I understood it is every time you want to use magic, it kind of has to be mentally signed off on by the emperor and has very tight bounds on how much power you can put into a spell. Both magics are kind of transferred to you through some sort of mark on your hand, whether it's like the Nyan ceremonial scar or a pattern tattooed onto the palm of your hand. There are other magics, but I don't want to go into them for fear of spoilers because they are very cool. So what did I enjoy most about the book? First of all, I just really liked the kind of change of pace it was for me in my own reading, a bit of a branching out, if you will. And I just really liked the way the story was told. It is a straight up character driven story where you are just in Alder's head and nothing else really matters. I love the moral ambiguity of Alder. It was a refreshing change of pace from the standard morally gray hero. Alder was incredibly selfish and frustrating and raw, but felt extremely real and true to his design. Every decision he made, even if it made me pull my hair out, was very true to his particular character and story. However, it did mean that there was not a ton of emotional attachment to him, or really the story for that matter, because it's all told through his eyes, and he's kind of a very cold person. So it was more of an intellectual appreciation for both those things. I really liked the pace of the story. It wasn't breakneck fast and it wasn't painfully slow. It was somewhere in the middle that felt a bit like, kind of like King Killer Chronicles, in the way that you're just watching this person go from event to event and kind of tackling day-to-day tasks. And it's not always super exciting, but it's always interesting and makes you wonder what's around the corner. I really liked learning about the different cultures and what they value, how their hierarchical society is set up, and how the government views its people. I also did really like the ending, especially the last 25% of the book is really where things start to change from the rest of the book, and it does leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger and wanting more. I didn't really feel like this was a bad thing. I liked where it ended, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think it set up things perfectly for the next book. I think the next book is going to get more into the typical fantasy story, as this one was really a lot of setup. Like the book had to lay a lot of foundation, and I think that the rest of the series could really do something special with a bigger adventure story. This very much is a debut novel that is setting everything up for future books. Things I hope to see in the next book would be more emotional attachments made, more regularly paced character growth, because it does take a while for Alder to kind of become something other than what he is at the beginning of the story. So I'd like to see more regularly paced character growth, more getting to the meat of the story, and more explanation of the magic system and kind of what the possibilities are within that. All in all, I would probably give this book a 7 out of 10. It was good, and I enjoyed my time with it. I'm not like itching right away to read the second one, but I will read it when it comes out. It's not really something I felt a big investment in, especially emotionally, but it was a very welcome diversion from my usual reading, and I really, really like the audiobook narrator. All right, everyone. Well, that about wraps us up. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to like and subscribe here on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter at Files Fantasy, or just look up Fantasy Files Podcast. Gabe was feeling a little sick last week, so we pushed out our King's Dark Tidings episode a little bit, and we'll upload that next week. And then it is on to Lightbringer. Check out our previous episode interviewing indie author Jared Smith, where we give away some codes for his new book on Audible. Just hop over there and follow the instructions right before we go into the spoiler section of the episode. Again, thank you so much for watching or listening wherever you consume our content. And until next time, consider getting a face tattoo.